Welcome to Natural Dyeing Day here at Fill Belly Forest, and we have scoured most of the fiber already, which it needs to get rid of the oils and pectins, and in the case of silk it has sericin on it, which is a coating for the thread of the cocoon. So we need to get rid of all of that so that the fiber is ready to uptake the dyes. So this has been weighed already here. And this is alpaca fleece unspun from my friend Nicole's garden. And we're just going to pre-soak it. All the other fibers have already been pre-soaked to be expedient with time. But this one we're going to pre-soak right now while we get some other stuff ready. And we're just going to put it in there. Okay. And then we're going to scour it. So we've weighed the fleece and the alpaca fleece and the sheepskin, and we're going to scour it, and we're going to do it at 0.5% of the weight of dry fiber. So I have measured that, and I'm going to put in the soap first. I probably shouldn't have the fiber already in, but I do, and I'm going to leave it that way. I'm using Dr. Bronner's lavender soap, which smells really good, but the reason I'm using it is because it's pH neutral, and we're an organic farm here, so we only want to use organic stuff, and that will help for the scouring here. If you don't have Dr. Bronner's, which I prefer but costs a lot more money, you can use Blue Dawn soap. Some people really love it, and apparently it does tons of stuff, but it's also pH neutral. So I'm just going to pour water. The amount of water doesn't matter as much. It's actually, the dyes and mordants have to do with the weight of the dry fiber. So just having enough water for things to move freely is important. And so we're going to do that, and we're going to let this soak for a little while to scour. It's not going to have as long a scour as it typically would, but it's going to be okay, because the scouring in this case is going to remove oils out of the yarn and fleece, and especially the alpaca, because it's kind of a raw fleece, and it will definitely need to have the oils removed, and the lanolin has to come out, or else the dyes won't be able to penetrate the fiber. So we're going to just leave that for a minute or two, well, actually longer than that, and let that clear. Usually you would leave it overnight, actually, or at least a couple of hours.
148.
140?
148.
148.
So I'll write that.
So let's say 150.
Okay.
And cent would be 1.5, and half of that would be 0.75, right? Right? I think so.
Mils. Okay.
So I'm going to do just like 3/4. You can do it.
Okay. This is of the soap.
Yep. Percent of the weight of dry fiber. And Rebecca weighed that at about 150 grams. Now we're doing cotton fabric, and we're going to just pour the water over it and let it sit for a bit.
And then you had mentioned that because this is cotton, aluminum is fine.
Yeah, because we're going to run cotton through an alum bath anyway, which has aluminum ions in it. We're not going to worry about using an aluminum pot for this. Generally, you use non-reactive pots, but if you're going to have it in aluminum anyway, we're going to use an aluminum pot.
Okay, so scouring literally just means cleaning.
Yeah, and it's not like scouring a pot, it's like soaking
With
some soap. Okay, this is silk fleece tops unspun. Beautiful wild silk from India. The luster was absolutely beautiful, and it'd be best if I wasn't doing any heat process on it at all to preserve all that luster. I did it in little bags to make it easier. It's scoured overnight, and then it's had three rinses since then. When you have fleece unspun, you have to be pretty gentle with it. Or wool in general, you have to be gentle. That means no sudden temperature changes. because it will felt. Silk won't felt as easily, but it also needs to be gentle. So we never wring, we just press, gently press. Smells like lavender, which is lovely. So here's the silk fleece, and I'm just going to drop it into this clean cardboard to drain a little bit. And here's another one. You have to rinse out the scouring soap really well. So that's one of the things you have to remember to do. But this will now be ready to go into a bath. I'm going to put half of it, which is 50 grams, into an alum bath and half of it into an iron mordant. There are other kinds of mordants as well that really do bring out beautiful colors, but they're highly toxic and we're not going to work with those. Examples of those would be chrome and copper and tin, and they're all heavy metals and they're really bad for the environment. And even though tin does really brighten up the color and they can bring out more color, we're just not going to use them here because we don't want to have to dispose of them on our farm, on our septic system. So we're just going to do it like that. So we have this all out of the scour bath. It's been well rinsed numerous times and it's ready to go into a mordant, which is a fixative, so the dye color will stay once it goes into the dye. If you're moving from one bath to another, you're trying to make the temperatures reasonably the same, and you have about a 5 degree window to play in. But if you're more than 5 degrees, you're gonna felt your fiber. And you can't agitate it either. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna test the pH of our water, which I'm curious about anyway. And I got pH strips at the pet store because they sell them for aquariums, so that's an easy access place. But any chemistry supply shop will have them as well. So I just pulled out one of these and I'm gonna just take out my test strip, dip it in the water, swirl it around a couple times, and then as I take it out, I'm going to check it with a little chart they give you. Whoops, hold it horizontally. Check it with a little chart and see what we have. Ideally, you want it to be neutral, your water, which is a pH of 7. Anything higher is alkaline or base, anything lower is acidic. But if you need to adjust it, it's not that hard to do. So here we're looking at, the water's fairly hard. The water's fairly hard. But not fully hard. It's probably about a 60, really. The carbonate hardness is about an 80. And the pH, oh my, it's so close to 7. Hooray! So we don't have to add anything, which is absolutely lovely. But if we did have, and there's no nitrates or nitrites in the water because this stayed blank. So I'm happy about that too, because I don't really want them in there. If we were too alkaline, we would just add a little bit of vinegar. And that's easy to do because it's acidic. In Mexico, they add lime juice when they want to make it more acidic. If we wanted it more alkaline, we could add soda ash or baking soda, any of those things like that. Oh, cream of tartar will push it to be more acidic as well. So that would go on the vinegar side here. So those are all things that we could work with. If we're trying to push up the hardness, we add chalk, but it's better to buy chalk powdered because this is chalk that you use on the sidewalk or the chalkboard, and we would have to smash it up to dissolve it. But hey, we have a pH of 7, so we don't have to do any of that. That's great. Okay, we're pre-soaking the woolen fibers here before they go in the dye bath, or the mordant, I should say, because they have not yet been mordanted. And I have some more. I pre-mix the water temperature, mixing hot and cold to make it kind of tepid because we don't want to shock the wool fiber. Wool is very sensitive to temperature change and agitation. If you want to make felt, do a lot of drastic temperature change and a lot of agitation. That's how you make felt. But since we don't want to make felt, I pre-mixed the temperatures so the 2 buckets were the same. You have about a 5 degree window of temperature change that you can do. So we're just going to let that sit until we're ready for the dye baths. You can leave it overnight, pre-soaking. Okay, this is all cotton fiber. It did come undone from the skeins I had done. It's actually not all cotton. This is rayon with the black polka dots. But rayon is kind of a hybrid between a natural and a synthetic. It comes from wood pulp, but then it's chemically synthesized. So we're going to try that just as an experiment. This has been sitting in a sumac leaf mordant bath, and because the cotton needs the tannin out of the sumac to open up the fibers so that it can then take another mordant as well as a dye bath. Otherwise it will not dye that well. So I'm going to pour it into here and strain it. I already strained sumac through this muslin already, but we're going to do that again. And then we're going to move on and put it into an alum bath. This is a mordant, a fixative. So we're going to strain it out. Sumac is also a dye, so you can see the water is a bit light green. But it's a mild enough one that it doesn't affect the fiber too much, because we're going to put this into other dye baths. This is just from the leaf of the sumac. And we're going to keep all of these mordants. And oh, by the way, the mordants and the dyes can be reused a number of times until they're exhausted. So we're going to be adding the stuff that we were just scouring this morning is going to go into here too, especially the cotton. Okay, so here's the sumac mordant slash dye, but a very pale dye. And now this is ready to go into an alum mordant. So next we'll be mixing up an alum mordant. So this is a sumac leaf because we're doing this in the autumn. It's autumn colors, but this still works as a good mordant even at this time of year. The ratio we used was 80 grams of sumac to 100 grams of cotton fiber. And I actually pulled these off the stem, the leaf stem here, so I was using just leaves. I did it a little more concentrated than that because I knew people would bring cotton things today, so I wanted it to have enough strength to add a bit more mordant into their fibers that'll come after their scour. 80 grams of fresh to 100 grams of fiber, or 40 grams dried, but we used fresh. So we heated this up after I took it off the stems and weighed it, heated it up and simmered it for 45 minutes. And then I strained it and then simmered the cotton fiber for an hour. And then I took it off the heat and let it sit overnight. So make sure it was really well mordanted. The reason is that if you don't do a tannin bath on your cotton first, the fiber is still closed and won't accept other mordants or dyes very well. So this is a really important step if you're doing cotton, because cotton is a plant fiber, or we call them cellulose fibers, and they're actually harder to dye than animal fibers or protein fibers like wool and silk. Okay, so now we're going to prepare our alum mordant, and actually you can use just potassium aluminum sulfate. However, for the cotton, it works better if it is aluminum acetate. It costs more and it's harder to find, so I'm going to make homemade aluminum acetate. And I'm going to do that by combining equal parts of the alum, potassium aluminum sulfate, with soda ash, which is very similar to washing soda, but this is pure soda ash. So I'm going to pour the water first, and that's important. And I'm just doing it in a little bit, like half a cup. I'm pouring the water first because if I don't, and I put the powder in, and then the water, the powder will come up, and I don't want to breathe it because it's particulate and it's irritating to the lungs. So we're going to always put powder into water and not the other way around. It's 150 grams and the same amount of the alum to do 1 kilo of fiber. We have more than that going on, so I'm probably going to do it twice. So here's 150 grams of the soda ash, and I'm going to just put it into my half cup of water here, which we already weighed out, and it's still warm. And now I'm going to do the same amount by weight, 150 grams of alum. Alum is an aluminum substance, so you still have to be a little careful with it, how you dispose of it. Certainly about breathing it. Some people wear gloves even because they find some of these things can be irritating to the skin, but I'm not doing that part right now. Okay. Okay, so I was 151 and 149, so we're at exactly the right amount. Here we go. And we're gonna dissolve it before we put it into hot water here. See, it's bubbling up like that. So we're just gonna stir this up. I'm using an aluminum pot now because I found it at the thrift store and because this is aluminum. So I'm not gonna worry about it. It will add a little bit of extra mordant, and that's called pot as mordant technique. But it's very mild compared to using the actual powder. There are a couple of plants that naturally have mordant alum in them, and one is called the alum plant, which makes sense, and that's actually known as coral bells, and it grows in eastern North America. I don't really have access to it today, and so we're using the powder, also because I wanted to show how to mix up the powder properly. So we're gonna use it just like that. Okay, so now that we got the powdered mordants wet with the hot water, I'm gonna top it up. I'm gonna add 3 more liters of water. Watch it bubble. Ooh, like making volcanoes with your kid. And I'm gonna do this one. And we're just gonna get some more water too. Thank you so much. That's a little bit. And that's probably going to fill this whole pot right up. And then we can do some of the fibers in this, which will be really nice. The potassium aluminum sulfate mixed with the soda ash. We're still diluting some more in there. It's still too concentrated. We wanted 150 grams each of soda ash and alum and 3 liters of water. So we're just still measuring that out. Okay, so we've mixed up the potassium aluminum sulfate with the soda ash, and now we're going to put the cotton fiber in. And this is an alum mordant that we're doing now, and the cotton has already been through a tannin bath with the sumac leaves. So now that tannin bath has allowed the cotton fiber to open up, and it's going to be able to take the alum much better than if we had not have done it. So I'm just going to pop stuff in here. When you're using yarn, be very careful about what kind of edges you're using because the yarn can get tangled up and stuff. So I'm holding the tongs shut so they don't get in the way. We're going to let this simmer in here for probably 45 minutes to an hour. We have a little time constraint today, so we're just doing the best we can. The other thing I have with the cotton in here is that rayon, which I showed earlier, because it's an experiment, because as I mentioned, rayon's part cotton, no, it's not part cotton, is natural source from the wood fiber, but it's synthesized chemically. So it has black polka dots, so that's great. We're gonna know what is the rayon all the way through the day because it has the black polka dots. Okay, so we're just gonna let that simmer for a while and we'll move on to some other things. So this is an iron mordant. I have had this big iron chain soaking in here for over 2 weeks, and it is a little harder to know the exact amounts because usually you would buy powdered iron mordant. I didn't want to, or you'd use rusty nails, which I didn't have. So the neighbor lent me a big gnarly rusty chain, which is pretty heavy, and I think this is actually an extremely strong iron mordant. Okay, so here comes the rusty chain. Out it comes. Feel like I'm pulling an anchor out of the bottom of the ocean. Here it comes. Wow, it looks like it's not rusty anymore. That is amazing because it was super rusty when I put it in. It's coming forever. There it is. And because it's so big and heavy and only the surface area has the rust, that's what makes it harder to figure out by weight how much iron I actually use. But we're just gonna work with that anyway. And now I'm gonna strain it because there's lots of little bits and you don't want these little bits to come in. And this was clear water when we started, and now it's an iron mordant. You can see all the little bits coming out. After you do an iron mordant, you really got to clean your pot because a lot of stuff gets stuck to the sides. And iron very much changes the dye color. It saddens the color. That's the term that's used in the dyer's world because it darkens it and it mutes it. But sometimes that makes it really beautiful. And if you're trying to get a black or a really dark brown, adding iron really helps with that. One issue with the iron is that when you put wool in, if you use too much iron mordant, it will make the wool brittle. And that is an important thing to consider. So sometimes less is more because you don't want your fleece or yarn to get all brittle. But it can have a great effect on the color of the dye. And personally, I actually really like when the colors get darkened and muted. So it's one of my favorite mordants. See, good thing we strained it. Use an aluminum pot to strain your iron. You have to know that you're getting a little bit of alum in there as well. And that can change the color somewhat. Usually it more just brightens it. It doesn't change it dramatically. Okay, so we're gonna put some silk fleece into the sumac bath because we're gonna tan in it. I'm not putting it all in because we want to do different mordants with the silk. So I'm putting about 70 grams of silk into the sumac bath that we already did the cotton in because there's still lots of potency to the sumac tannin bath here. And that orangey autumn leaf turned kind of pale green. I don't know if you can see that, but we're gonna let the silk steep in there, but we're gonna keep an eye on the temperature because we do not want the silk to get overheated or it loses its luster. And we might keep it around 90 degrees Fahrenheit, but we could bring it up higher than that, maybe to 120, but I want to be careful because this did have a beautiful luster to it. So we're just going to let that be in the warm sumac tannin mordant for a while now. Okay, we just put the wool yarn into the alum bath. We took the cotton out. We cooled down the alum bath a little bit because of not wanting to shock the wool, but I was a little impatient and probably should have let it cool a little bit more, but I wanted to get it going. So I'm not going to stir it. I don't want to agitate it. I'm just poking it underneath, recording the time, and then we'll come back and switch it to a dye bath. But until that time, the cotton's ready to go into dye baths, so we're going to do that next. Okay, now we're going to strain the St. John's wort. It has been soaking overnight. I did pre-weigh it, and we're going to pour it through here and just get rid of all the bits because it's very hard to get it off the fibers and fabric if you don't. Here we go. Thank you, Nicole. So we're going to strain the onion skin dye bath before we heat it, and that's been soaking overnight there. And I want to show you, we don't just use natural dyes on fiber, but they're often done on Easter eggs. They can be done on leather and wood and all kinds of stuff, shell. Natural dyes will take to natural fibers pretty well. So these were done in onion skin here. Okay, in we go. It's nice to strain it. There's some cases you don't have to strain. I'll show you, we'll do some with the fiber and the dye together, but the messier ones that are going to stick to the fiber, we don't want them together. It'll make too much work for us later. That's going to be nice. Okay, so the next one we're going to strain is the walnut husks. We are on an orchard that has organic walnuts growing, so we had plenty of husks. This will be our darkest dye that we're making, and combined with the iron mordant, we can get pretty close to black or a very dark brown. But here it comes. I left the husks in an onion skin bag just to make it a little easier, so we didn't have black husks going everywhere. These do stain your skin and clothes, so this one is probably the one you have to be pretty careful with if you're not wanting to get all blackened. Look at that nice deep color, eh? That's going to be good. And you're going to see that the different mordanted fibers will take the color differently. And interestingly, you can reuse these dye baths until they're exhausted, but the second and third takes sometimes come up with different colors than the first take, which is really interesting. And another point around natural dyes is that some of them are called unity dyes. They have chemicals in them that might do plant fibers or might do animal fibers. And if you only do one, cotton or wool, when you pour away that dye, you're throwing the other part away. RIT dyes are like that, the kind you buy from the store. So you can actually do cellulose plant fibers and animal fibers without needing more dye on those types of dyes, because there's different chemicals that penetrate the different fibers. So all the other dyes got pre-soaked overnight, pre-weighed, dried, and then pre-soaked to release their color. The only one I didn't do yet was the marigold. So I'm going to do that right now. And I hate to break up this beautiful bouquet, but we're going to do that anyway. And we're going to make a little dye out of them, which will probably be yellowish. It's easy to get yellows and oranges and browns from natural dye. Harder to get the blues and a bright red, but they are possible. Turquoise is hard. Copper mordant will bring out turquoise, but we're not working with copper today. Wow, exactly 100 grams. I'm going to now take that 100 grams of marigold flour and I'm going to pour this hot water on. I am not measuring the water because I have a general idea of what it'll do. I'm going to let that simmer for a little while before we put any fiber into it. I'm going to fill it right up here. And that was a full kettle, so it was about 1.5 liters of water. Okay, so what I'm doing now is straining the pre-soaked Oregon grapefruit. Look at that gorgeous yellow color. This has been soaking overnight. I only have a little pot right now, so I'm just going to put a little bit in until we free up a bigger pot. I really wanted to do the Oregon grapefruit because it is a traditional dye of the Sinaiacs people that live in our area of southern interior BC. It's something that they used regularly, and I wanted to use what gets used in this area. So we're going to bring this up to a heat, and we're just going to put a little bit of fiber in it because I just got a little tiny pot for this one. But as we free up a pot, we'll move it into a bigger one. So here we have the Oregon grapefruit that we just strained out, and I'm putting the cotton in. This cotton has come out of an alum. It's been tannin mordanted with sumac and then alum. And now it's going into the Oregon grapefruit. Look at that beautiful color. Oh my goodness, that's going to be so lovely. So because cotton can handle the heat quite well, I'm going to turn this up a little bit. We'll turn it down when we're adding wool, but for now, it's good with the cotton. Okay, this is the madder. This is the only one that's not local of all the different dyes we had. And because we're trying to do this in a condensed period of time, I have put some of the dyes into nylon stockings, knee-high pantyhose type of thing that I got at the thrift store, because that way it gives me a stronger dye bath while I'm soaking the fiber. And this is my pre-soaked cotton that's going in with a little bit of rayon, the polka dot one. And we're going to let that simmer away. We're not going to add the wool yet because we're going to cool it a little bit before the wool goes in. But we're going to let that go. And this will probably end up being our reddest dye of the day. And that's why I bought the madder, just to give us that little bit of red punch. Okay, here in this pot, we have elecampane root, Inula helenium. And I have the chunks of root. They should have been chopped up small, but no time to do that. I ran over them with the car, actually, put them in a bag and ran over them with the car. But because they're big roots, I'm gonna leave them in the dye bath because they should be easy to get out later. And as you can see, it looks sort of brownish, the color of this dye that's warming up. It's been pre-soaking all night. Now, it's supposed to come out with a blue. I'm not sure if that's gonna happen or not, but what I'm gonna do is add a little bit of salt because I've read that can help push it to the blue. So this is an assistant to the dye, and I'm gonna put a tablespoon of salt in here and see if we can get it to the blue. And traditionally, they did add salt, and they also added blueberries. Whortleberries, if you're reading an old English book, but basically it's blueberries. So I'm just gonna stir that up in here. I don't know if we're gonna get it to blue or not, but that's an experiment we're gonna find out. I'm gonna add my cotton and my rayon in here, and I'm bringing up the heat of this dye bath, and we'll let it sit. It doesn't look like it's gonna be blue because it looks pretty brown now, but so we'll just find out what we're gonna get as time goes on. Anticipation. The next dye bath we have here is yarrow, Achillea millefolium. Like the other ones, I put them into little stocking sausages so I could leave them in the dye bath to help make it a little stronger. And I'm gonna add the cottons in, weighed and mordanted and pre-wet fiber. And we'll probably get a yellow, but you can get olive green. I'm working with dried yarrow here, so I'm not 100% sure what we're gonna get. There's a little bit of rayon in here too, just to test it out. This is another herb that was a traditional dye by the Sinaiacs people that live here in the southern interior, the interior Salish people. So they used yarrow just like they use the Oregon grapefruit. So these are two traditional dyes of our area, and I wanted to include that in our day here. Okay, in this dye bath here, we have marigolds, Tagetta species. I was going to do calendula, but someone gave me a beautiful bouquet, so that saved me time. And I have the cotton ready to go. And because I didn't cut them up, I figure they're going to be pretty easy to get off the fiber, so I'm going to leave them in. I think the colors of marigold and calendula are somewhat similar in terms of dye, which is generally a yellow. So this has alum, tanned cotton and rayon in it, but when we get to the wools, you'll see that that'll change the color as well. Okay, this dye bath is yellow dock root, Rumex crispus. I'm working with a dried powdered root. It's a little on the old side. I'm not sure how well it's gonna go, but we will just try it out. I don't know, I'm expecting some kind of a brown. I'm only putting the cotton in right now. I've been dipping my hands into the allumed cotton without gloves on, and probably I should have gloves on because it gets a little bit drying on the skin, but I'm just trying to motor right along, so I'll just put a little lotion on later. I think it'll be okay. So we're gonna heat this one up. I actually think this might not be our best dye of all, but I could be proven wrong, which would be nice. So again, I have the powder in a stocking, so I'm leaving it right in to help make the dye a little bit stronger. So here we have the onion skin dye bath, and this is a pretty exciting color. It's one of the easiest natural dyes to do. See the beautiful orange color? I'm gonna put in my cottons right now and the rayon. We're gonna simmer that for a bit. We'll be adding the wool shortly, and it's gonna take, earlier I showed the Easter eggs done in onion skin, so you get a beautiful rusty orange typically, and that can be pushed one way or another using the mordants. Okay, we're gonna add wool into the St. John's wort. These yarns have been mordanted some in iron, some in alum, and some in sumac. Here's a little silk fleece. We used bread tags and marked A for alum, S for sumac, and we didn't mark the iron because I know it's going to be darker and we know the unmarked ones are iron. We do have a few controls that we're going to mark that didn't get mordanted just so we can see how it ended up. So we're going to put it in there, and now I'm going to turn the heat on gentle. This was just like sort of just slightly warm because again with the wool and the silk you don't want to shock with temperature change too much. So I'm going to put the lid on that guy, and the St. John's wort is full of the wool now. Okay, this is the black walnut dye. It is, or sorry, it's not black walnut, it's English walnut. And it is so dark, dark like molasses. And I'm excited about it because that's actually what I want. So I'm gonna put in the wool yarn, the alpaca fleece. There's a little bit of silk fleece in here as well. I put in one piece of cotton, but I'm gonna add more. And it's gonna be so exciting. We're gonna leave it for a while. Already you can see the dye color coming out. The cotton takes it a little lighter, but see how quickly the yarn went dark? And I'm probably gonna let it steep overnight to get a good dark color. Okay, this is Usnea longissima. I harvested this when I lived in Squamish Valley, so I've had it for a long time. I only ever harvested it after storms that knocked it down to the ground because I didn't want to take it live off a tree because we really need this to grow. And it only grows in happy forests, which means long, older forests. Now what I did with this, you could boil this the way we've been doing the other dyes and get a kind of orange out of it. But what I've done today, or actually I started it a few weeks ago, was a ferment. It's not a true ferment. Traditionally lichens were done with urine as a mordant. And in fact, in Scotland, they always used little boys' urine. It was the thing they did. I think it's because little boys would find it fun peeing into the vat or whatever. But I didn't do that. I used the modern day substitution, which is ammonia. Not that ammonia is in our urine, urea is, and then it converts to ammonia. So at first I saw it as a 1 to 10, and that's what I did. And then looking elsewhere, I saw it as a 1 to 10, meaning 1 part ammonia to the rest water. But then I saw it as 1/3 ammonia to 2/3 water. And I thought, oh, I didn't put enough ammonia in. So I topped up extra ammonia, but I couldn't make it that strong because it didn't. Thank you. Because I couldn't fit it all in. Now, over the few weeks, I've been stirring it every day or two, and you can see it's kind of turned to mush, which isn't how it is in its natural state. That's the ammonia breaking it down. It's supposed to get to a purple color. If you just boil it, you only get orange, but purple's hard to get. Purple's really expensive in natural dye world. Royalty for it. And they used to get it from mollusks, like shellfish, squeezing those little shellfish out. Apparently they still do that in Oaxaca. Thank you for the assistance. And this was a substitute for the really expensive purple. There's a thing called Tyrolean purple, which came from Lebanon, but from a few countries. And that was a very expensive purple, but we're gonna see if we can get a purple. The warm colors are much easier to get in natural dyes. This is on. Okay, so it doesn't look purple now, but you never know once the fiber goes in. So we're gonna try that. I'm gonna put it on the burner. We're gonna add some fiber to it. I'm pretty excited because I've never done this before. You can smell the ammonia a bit, but the lid was cracked a little bit over the last few weeks so that we could get that going. So we're gonna put some different things in here. Okay, start with some wool yarn. We're going to add the cottons and everything else that we have available to go in. This is iron mordanted. I'm going to recognize it because it's going to be darker than the other things. Okay, put some of that in there. Thank you. Here's some cotton bits going in. Oh, rayon. We'll throw a little rayon in so we can see what that is. We have things marked with our little system that hopefully will work out, so we'll know what's what. And that's good. So this is a usnia, and we're going to let this heat up and then steep for a while, and we'll see if we get anything close to purple or not. Not sure what's going to happen with that one. So we've managed to put a little bit of everything into all the different dyes. We marked our alum mordanted fibers and our sumac mordanted fibers. The cotton had both. We have iron mordanted. We have a few controls that had no mordant at all, just to see the difference. They all went into all the different dyes. I'm going to leave a lot of them overnight, and then we'll come back and see what the different colors were. And it's going to be very exciting to see all the different changes that we have. Stay tuned. Time goes by as time does, and here we are a week later, because natural dyeing really is a pretty long process. It's like slow food. It's a slow fashion, we could call it. And so you didn't actually see us take the fibers out of the dye, but what we did was we were stirring, and I left everything in the dye for over 24 hours. So the minimum was 25 hours, and a few things were in there for a few days. So while it was in the dye bath, the wool in particular, you have to be pretty gentle with, and the same with the silk. So instead of vigorous stirring, it was just very gentle turning of the yarns and the fabrics now and then. Cotton can handle a lot more than the animal fibers. The alpaca we were gentle with. We put it into little nylon stockings. Didn't take the dye as well. It has a hollow fiber, and it's a little bit harder to get the dye into it, and it probably wasn't scoured long enough. But when we took it out, we just gently squeezed. No wringing, no tough agitation, just gently squeezing the dye out. And a lot of that dark color pours right out. This is from the English walnut again. So just was holding it and squeezing it and then leaving it to dry. All of the fabrics and fibers you're going to see now, they haven't been rinsed yet. And the reason for that is I want them to dry completely so maximum dye bondage happens with the fiber. You can rinse them immediately after pulling out, but you will lose more dye out of it. So I want to keep all the dye in it. So that's why we're doing it this way. And we're going to rinse them later. So we used a technique that I just made up of using bread clips on this to mark what mordant it was. And so there's an A on this bread clip. So I know that this skein of yarn went through the alum bath, the potassium aluminum sulfate mordant. And it doesn't change the color that dramatically. This one was iron because it's a lot darker. It went through an iron bath. And I found the bread clip technique worked really well. I did a test run boiling the bread clips to see how long they would last. And at a full boil, after half an hour, they start to bend. But we kept everything below a boil, and the Sharpie marker held up fine, and the bread clips held up fine, and they didn't fall off. So it worked really well. I'm kind of proud of myself about that one. Anyway, that's how I'm going to do it from now on, because I like that. I'll probably do a sun test with some of them too in the sunlight to see how color fast they are. But for now, this is what we have. And it's a beautiful color. I'm happy with it, how dark it is. The rayon took quite well, pretty much as well as cotton. This is cotton next to it. And we'll take a look at all the different beautiful colors we have now. Okay, so here are some of the samples of what we did in the dye bath. And this is some marigold over here. There turned out to be quite a bit of cotton pieces. It took it pretty nicely, but you'll see that the cotton yarn actually really took it about the best. And I want to work some more with marigold. This one was a control piece that had no mordant in it. So it took the color very well, but whether it will be light fast and color fast, I'm not sure because I didn't run it through a mordant. On the other hand, these ones went through the sumac mordant, which is a tannin bath. So that should be pretty good. And the silk fleece, still really soft and lustrous. We'll see how that goes. Then over here we have the English walnuts, and wow, the cotton really enjoyed that bath and sucked it up, which is nice. And again, we have the sumac on the silk. So we have a few things going on here. And then the onion skins gave us quite a nice orange. So we got orange happening, especially at the tips where the cuts were, because when you cut the fiber, the ends really soak it up. And a little bit of sheepskin, not quite as orange, but a really warm yellow, which is quite lovely. So here we have the yellow dock root, which I didn't have a lot of faith in at first because the dye bath itself was like sort of just a brownie color. I didn't think I'd get much, and yet we got a beautiful pink came out of it. So that was really nice. And the cotton took it quite well. And we have also the fabric coming from the wool fiber sumac. Quite nice, a little bit browner, whereas the cotton took it in a more pink way. Different fibers take dyes differently. And the rayon, I think some of that pebbly bit will come off after the first wash. The St. John's wort gave us a lovely greeny yellow. Well, the silk took the yellow. It maintained its luster. It's so beautiful and soft, this silk fleece. It's wild fleece from India. The sheepskin took it in a bit more of a greener way. Interesting how the different fibers take things differently. And we have the various wool yarns. This was a control that had no mordant at all on it. But the other ones did have mordants. This went through sumac and alum. This one's cotton. Okay, over here we have usnea, and we were all surprised by the usnea because, interestingly, it gave a green that actually looks like the usnea plant, or the lichen usnea. Almost the same color. Like, actually, it looks like usnea. So that was pretty interesting to me. And the wool took it slightly browner. So the different fibers. This one's the silk. That's the one I like the best because it's almost a pale teal, which is lovely. This one had some iron in it, so it made it darker. Okay, over here we have the yarrow, one of my favorite plants medicinally, and now also as a dye because we got a beautiful yellow cotton from the yarrow. And that was even really old yarrow. I go through my herbal shelves and get rid of old dyes. Oh, sorry, old herbs I don't want to use for medicine. I'm using them for dye baths. And got a beautiful yellow on that. The cotton took it tremendously, as did the wool as well. So that's really nice. And then we had the elecampane root. We were hoping for a bit of blue, but not really. We more got like a little bit of a gray. But gray can be useful in your colorscape, especially if you're doing a landscape. So the sheepskin didn't take it too much, actually. So this might have been our palest one. And this was the control with no mordant, and it barely colored it. So I felt that the elecampane, it colored it a bit. The elecampane gave us the least result in this situation. And here we have the Oregon grapefruit I'm pretty excited about. That's a really nice, rich, goldeny, orangey gold that we got on the woolen yarns. On the cotton, it was a little bit paler, but still blending really nicely. And I'm now going to just show you the madder. This was the only dye that I actually went out and purchased. And to get that pinky red or pink, I might use some assist later to see if I can push it more towards red. And even the sheepskin took it quite nicely. So you get nice peachy color, and the lustrous silk fleece is nice too. So that was a madder. And I threw that one in just to add a little pink pizzazz into everything, but everything else is locally grown here, so that's a pretty nice mix of stuff. So this tie-dye came out of the English walnut dye. My helper Rebecca quickly put it together because she wants to sew something out of it, and it turned out just beautiful. It was in there for about over 24 hours, for a few days actually, and it took the dye really beautifully. And she's going to make something nice with it. And these are the skeins from the English walnut dye. They haven't been rinsed like the other stuff, but I'm letting the dye bond completely to the fiber. And when they're bone dry, they'll get their final rinse. But that's fun, isn't it? All of this couldn't be done just all by myself. You can do it by yourself if you're doing less dyes at once, but I had friends helping me, and I really appreciate that. So I want to say thank you to them. And I also appreciated the creativity and ideas that they contributed to this video, and some of the ideas of how we were going to figure things out and stuff like that. Many heads really help in that regard, but it's a fun project to do. So maybe get a few friends in and do something together. It makes it lively and fun, and you can laugh and have a good time while you're doing it. Okay, so another great thing about the natural dyes is that they can be used again. They can be used repeatedly until all of the dye chemical constituents have been used up in the fabric, with the fabric. And different fibers, like cotton versus wool, etc., take up different chemical constituents. So some baths, which are called unity dyes, can do cotton and animal proteins, and they use up different chemicals in them, so you're not using up the same thing in the dye. Therefore, you can reuse your dyes. They might be a little paler each time, but I've saved these dyes for future use, and the ones I have larger amounts I have in big white buckets. And so now I guess I'm a dye gal for hire, because I have got a whole shebang of dyes to use and mordants already pre-mixed, ready to go. So the bulk of the work has been done, and now for future dyes it'll be easier. And you can add a little bit of fresh dye material if you want to give it a bit more punch, but you can keep using these things. And you can also reheat the actual dye material and give it a whole nother run as well. So I just want to mention a couple of useful books. There's lots of websites you can go to and get all kinds of information, but there's so much variance in amounts and quantities and instructions that sometimes that can be overwhelming. So I'm just going to list a few things here that I find helpful. This book is probably one of the very best, Wild Colors by Jenny Dean. Very organized, and she has tried so many things, and the information in it is fabulous, actually, and many different plants that she has in it. So if you really want a solid guide with very practical instructions, I would say Jenny Dean is good, really good. And this one is by India Flint. She's Australian. She is a renegade guerrilla natural dyer. She goes traveling with Ziploc bags and picks up bits of plants and mordants off the sidewalk and does dyes in her hotel room in Ziploc bags. So I am so impressed by that. I think that's great. So she is on the far edge, and she's actually the one that gave me the idea that I could use aluminum pots and different things. They don't always have to be non-reactive as long as you want that pot as mordant effect. There's lots of older dye books around. They're good for recipes, but the quantities might be in pecks and different things. And older dyes, and all dyes were natural until 1856, with William Perkins discovering a synthetic dye by accident when he was trying to make a cure for malaria, and he ended up with a purple dye, and that's how synthetic dyes started. But all dyes before that were natural dyes, but they did boil them a lot, and we have found out now that often a lower heat is better, especially to preserve the luster in silk and not to damage the fiber of the wool, whatever. Maewa handprints in Vancouver on Granville Island are a fantastic resource. This is their brochure. A number of the things we're using here at the workshop came from them, and they have on their website a whole instructional package that is free for you to download and use, not to sell or share, but to download and use, and I highly recommend it because it's really good. And locally, in the southern interior here, Joybilee Farm in Greenwood This woman is a natural dyer, and I got some stuff from her too. So if you're local to our area, you might want to access her. But Maywa Handprints, they do mail orders all over the country, so they're really good too. Yeah, we did quite a bit of dyeing. It was so fun, and so we ended up with a lot of stuff. So we have here the onion skins, and we have the usnea with that greenish tinge over here, which is really nice. Again, the yarrow, which is a more sunshine yellow, as opposed to the Oregon grape, which is a rich orangey golden color down here. In between, we have the madder, which doesn't grow in Canada typically, but I did purchase that one just for effect, which was kind of fun. And then we have St. John's wort, and at the very end, the Ella campaign. If you want a close-up look at these, there are still photos that will show up in the video that you can pause your computer at and really study the different colors with the different names. Now, I did a lot of mini skeins, and the reason I did these mini skeins, like there's a lot of usnea here, is because I want to do a final inventory of a sample book, and I find the mini skeins are really good. You can put them into acetate sleeves or glue them onto a card or make a binder, however you want to do it. And then you can identify your madder and the different mordants and go, oh, this one's sumac, this one's alum. And then you'll know for when you want to do future dyeing. You can refer back to your reference book, which is really handy. Now, you may think that some of these colors are a little pale or bland, and one by one they may look like that, but as a blend, they're really beautiful, and so they lend themselves to artwork quite well. A lot of people do felting, and you can blend the colors, so then you can use the fleece tops unspun, which is really nice, and blend different colors together, and that works great in felting. Also in weaving, like tapestry weaving, you can do beautiful landscapes mixing these harmonious colors of the earth, because these are the colors of the earth. You make the greatest landscapes that commercial dyes just can't quite capture in the same way. And the subtle blending, like if you wanted to do waves or autumn leaves or whatever, you can do really nice work with natural dyes in weaving for sure. So that's really nice. One thing I should confess is that we were really carried away the dye day a week ago, and as we were pulling out the yarns and fabrics or just working with them, we stopped wearing gloves at a certain point, which was wrong. Wear your gloves, because our hands were so dry afterwards. I had to put my herbal salve on like 3 times to bring my skin back. So that was a mistake on my part, just out of eagerness and impatience. So definitely wear your gloves, because it does dry the hand out. Especially the alum mordant, I think, has the biggest effect on that way. So don't negate the gloves. They are important, but do have fun with your natural dyeing, because there's so many exciting experiments you can do, and sometimes you don't know what you're going to get, and that's the beauty of the unexpected art in it, and all the potential this gives you to take the next step further in your seamstressing or weaving or felting or whatever fabric art you're involved in. But do enjoy the plants in the natural world, and they give us such a bounty. It's fantastic. Thank you.